G'day mate, 40 here. So one of the biggest stories I ever broke was in 2007 when I got a tip that the mayor of Los Angeles, Antonio Villaraigosa, had stopped wearing his wedding ring. And a bloke in public life stops wearing his wedding ring for months at a time. Right? You'd think that people would take notice. And so turned out that the mayor of Los Angeles, Antonio Villaraigosa, was having an affair with a newsreader on a Spanish language TV station that his marriage had effectively ended months before. And a lot of journalists knew about this, but they wouldn't report it because they just thought it was too dirty. That this was the first Latino mayor of Los Angeles in many, many years, and they felt kind of protective of him. They didn't want to say anything gross. And then the story blew up and became the #1 story in Los Angeles for the year 2007. And that was effectively the end of Antonio Villaraigosa's, not just that marriage, but his political career. Now we've got a new Speaker of the House, right, Kevin McCarthy, and he is publicly not wearing his wedding ring. He is publicly very affectionate with Marjorie Taylor Greene. Right? They seem to have a very physical relationship, and nobody wants to seem to talk about it. It's just too gross, right? To picture, Kevin McCarthy and Marjorie Taylor Greene hooking up. But this is the undernews, guys. This is what's really going on in the world. This is why you come to 40 to find out the real story, and that's why you also go to people like Charles Johnson. So Charles Johnson reminds me a lot of that journalist they made a movie about, and he published a story in the San Jose Mercury News about how the CIA was funding the importation of cocaine into South Central Los Angeles to fund the Contras. Now, there were one or two important parts of that story that were false. Right? Kill the Messenger. Was that the name of the book and the name of the movie? There were a couple of parts of that story that are not accurate, but the journalist, right, he nailed a lot of the story. He just needed a good editor, and he didn't get good editing. And so too with Charles Johnson. I think he nails a lot of undernews, and he is also at times irresponsible and needs a good editor. So Charles Johnson is friends with Congressman Matt Gaetz. Charles Johnson introduced Matt Gaetz to his wife. Charles Johnson is a real player, and he is simultaneously a fringe dissident figure. So he's an interesting bloke, and I would never just accept something he says as gospel. At the same time, I would never automatically deny something that Charles Johnson said just because it comes from that notorious troll Charles Johnson. I think he's still
All right. How are you guys doing?
banned from Twitter.
What's today's topic going to be? Well,
come on, man. What's today's topic? All right, this is Richard Spencer in
you're listening to Chuck
dialogue.
talk about why he was firmly in support of Gates on that one. I mean, I offered my support in the sense that I found the whole thing comical, and maybe just as well. Like, in the sense of McCarthy endorses Trumpism and January 6th after the revolution failed and just wants to ride the donkey but then not pay the price or something like that. I think Gates has, how do you pronounce his last name? Is it Matt Gaetz? Matt or Gates? Gates, yeah. He has his own whole political agenda, but I think it's sort of funny how he just threw
Yeah, Matt Gaetz has now become one of the most talked about Republicans in the country. He was previously an object of derision for being faced with child trafficking or sex trafficking accusations, which ultimately were never brought. He was known for years essentially just as a Trump toady, and now he's increasingly looked like a real political force in his own right, coming to prominence for opposing Kevin McCarthy as House of Representatives Speaker.
A spanner in the works, right? Like, but I just wanted to, talking to some of my boomer conservative relatives, just listening to them to veg, This is bad for the party. This is bad for conservatives everywhere. I'll listen to this immediately like, walls. Yeah, exactly. That's basically how I felt. The other thing that's of interest is the J6 phenomenon is clearly a global phenomenon. And there are obviously just so many connections between.
Right, and like, part of that is just like being a criminal and doing protests. Right, that's not uniquely American. Right, I don't think that there are powerful figures behind the scenes who are driving the January 6th and the Brasilia protests. Right, it's a lot of idiots acting out, and then maybe some smarter people thinking, how do we take advantage of this energy? So I don't agree with Charles Johnson's more conspiratorial perspective.
Between what happened in Brazil this past weekend and January 6th, although the Brazilian one was a kind of pale echo in a way. There was nothing going on in Brasilia at the time. They're kind of cool, modern, hyper-modernist Capitol building. There was nothing actually going on, so there was no there was no steel to stop, as it were. And whereas Trump was really directly engaged, Bolsonaro was actually in Florida, apparently being hospitalized for a stomach issue. So,
is it wrong to suggest that maybe the Brazilian coup attempt was, shall we say, lazy? Is that too stereotypical?
That's wrong.
Sort of did it after the new president was already sworn in. It's kind of an error, a category error in coup.
It was like an ex post facto coup.
Yeah.
Well, I think the better word is chill, not lazy. Like, it's a chill. They're chillaxed doing their coup. Yeah, that's how I would describe it.
What I find so interesting about all these attempts is all the people with cameras. They like run in and they take pictures of everything, and it's just so it's so of our time, right? That like I am going to record myself run into a building committing a crime. I think that this will go well for me,
Whatever happened to like the '80s style like successful coup, like or like the Pinochet coup, or like Argentinian helicopter rides, like none of that stuff happens now.
Oh no, au contraire, my friend. I mean, that stuff happens all the time, all throughout Africa. It's just done in all sorts of subtle ways by the United States and by other players.
I stand correct.
Yeah. I mean, it's not as thematic, right? It's not as like it's not like the movies. It's more like, oh, we're going to shave a percentage point off here or there in this specific county because we control all the voting machines in Democratic Republic of Congo, say, right? It's like that kind of thing.
Right.
Look, that only goes on in Africa. It doesn't go on in our blessed country.
And this tribe has become a little inconvenient, so we're just going to hack them all to death.
Yeah, I mean, there's a real honest goodness war going on in the Democratic Republic of Congo right now, in large measure being fought by the United States and Britain against Netanyahu and Paul Kagame and all that over all the rare earths that are in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So,
by the way, I just want to say I'm not fed posting. I meant that as just as.
No, that's quite all right. I mean, the feds know me, and let me tell you, I prefer having them as customers than as persecutors. So, if we could keep it in that.
So yeah, I don't agree with everything Charles Johnson says. Maybe overstating his own credentials and his own power and influence. Now, on the other hand, he is a player. He is incredibly smart and interesting guy. So this is Charles Johnson in dialogue with Richard Spencer.
I'd rather be funded by the police rather than defund them. Just to be technical, as my sort of day job is to build companies that do a lot of work with the U.S. intelligence and law enforcement communities. So. That sort of gives you kind of my view on this. And in the spirit of full disclosure, I have publicly, Clearview AI, which is a company I helped to co-found. I've called for them to make the facial recognition technology more widely available to civic society in Brazil and elsewhere to kind of identify who all these people were that sort of stormed the. What is it? It's like the policia, or what the hell is the thing they actually stormed?
Brasilia. It's like a modernist utopian vision of a future society that looks kind of like a 1960s sci-fi movie. I've always found it.
I've been there before when I was quite young, when I was like 17 or so. Mm-hmm. And all I remember from it is just how terribly hot it was and how giant the mosquitoes were and how there was so little shade anywhere. And so when I was seeing all the photos, I'd actually been to that building many years ago because my uncle was in the intelligence community and we went down there. And it was very interesting because we were sort of like walking around, and of course it's just kind of like, it's Brazil, so no one's like really working, but they all make like the attempts to appear like they're working. And then of course you have the government worker kind of overlay onto that, right, which is also like notorious for not working. But it's in like the middle of Brazil, like it's like way away from Rio or Sao Paulo, all the places you'd want to go in Brazil, like it's so far removed from that.
Okay, do you guys remember Josh Randall? He was a moderator, a major supporter of the show, and good bloke. I called him many times just to schmooze, and about a year ago, he came on the show, and he was in a bad mood. And he'd earlier warned me that he falls out with every YouTube channel that he ever joins and supports. and he's in a bad mood, and he was saying that the world is run essentially by intelligence agencies and bankers. Right? It's intelligence agencies and bankers. They run the world. They pull the strings. And I said, I don't think that's true. I think that's just an exciting conspiracy theory to make your life, more exciting and meaningful, and to feel superior to other people who take the world at more face value. And he went off, like he sent me a text message like, "Don't psychoanalyze me. Now let's get out of here." He said to Laponius, "Let's get out of here. Now, this place is trash." He's never returned to the channel. But anyway, I'm just thinking about his view that intelligence agencies run the world. And you do see with the release of the Twitter files that how influential intelligence agencies are in daily life. A little more influential, moderately more influential than I thought. I mean, I didn't realize that American intelligence agencies were contacting Twitter and social media companies, asking them to take down posts.
From that. So it's just it's a very interesting place, because it's sort of like it's trying to be something that it's not really capable of being. Resilient.
Exactly. It's trying to be the future as imagined in the mid-20th century. And so there's a certain kind of irony to it. There's also kind of interesting juxtaposition between the famous, touchdown Jesus statue known around the world and this hyper-modernist capital. There's a lot going on.
So I'm currently in Maroubra, all right? So in the eastern suburbs of Sydney. I am about 4 miles south of Coogee. I'm about 8 miles south of Bondi Beach. We're about, if we're going to walk it, it'd be about 10-12 miles to get to the Sydney Opera House. So I just kind of wanted to give you a lay of the land where we are right now. And we're going to take a little walkabout here. I'm going to go over the fence and down onto the crumbling cliffs. I'm going to try to avoid falling into the ocean. But let's do it. Live life on the edge of the cliff. I find it energizing to be as close to the ocean as possible. If I'm not going to be in the ocean right now, then let me get as close to the ocean as possible. My father would talk about the power of negative eons. And so it's such a beautiful place, and hardly anyone walks by. I mean, I could sit out here and live stream about Kevin McCarthy hooking up with Marjorie Taylor Greene. No one's going to dispute me. No one's going to bother me. This is like a free speech zone. So Hyde Park in the business district of Sydney, it's notorious for being a free speech zone where any nutter could set up prior to live streaming. Any nutter could get up in Hyde Park and start giving a speech. And depending on the power of his rhetoric, you could gain an audience. Is the Josh Randall interview available? No, it wasn't an interview. He was just a bloke in the chat. But absolute stalwart of the stream. Like nobody came in the chat more often. Like no one was a bigger financial supporter of the show. We never had any disputes or arguments. But then I made the mistake of kind of deriding his conspiracy theory that the intelligence agencies were really running the show. And then I psychoanalyzed, said that, people get into conspiracy theories because they're so exciting. And he didn't appreciate that. He sent me off a fiery text. Don't psychoanalyze me, bro. Okay, here we go. I think this ladder seems... No one can fill Josh's shoes. I think this ladder is pretty stable. Here we go. Just want to get a little closer to the ocean. Want to feel those negative eons. And I need energy to do these high quality live streams. Okay, where is a nice, comfortable place to set up shop, do some high quality live streaming. But it's hard to maintain relationships when you're arguing, over very deeply held, passionately held issues. All right, like we do here. We talk about God and religion and God's moral law and natural law. And yeah, ocean misted air is delightful. Absolutely agree. There seems to be an energy coming off the oceans that days like this where I'm flagging a little bit in energy, right, to keep on providing the high quality energetic live streams with upward melodic pitch as I go through my sentences, right, so I don't just come down at the end of at a comma or a period, but we want upward, walking up the scales in pitch to keep a high level of excitement. Right, I need energy to keep moving up the staircase of pitch. So, all right, the rock is wet. This seems like a pretty energizing place to be set up for a good old chinwag about Kevin McCarthy, the mob, Netanyahu, Israel, Charles Johnson, Richard Spencer, Brazil's own version of January 6th. Okay. Just looking for a nice, comfortable seat here. So many to choose from. Here we go. No worries, mate. Get out the old second phone for the high quality audio content.
An ex-girlfriend of mine's father served in the Brazilian intelligence services, and so she and I were talking the other day about this whole setup, and she at one point worked for Congressman Gates, so it's sort of like, it's interesting how all these kind of things are connected. And anyway, what she was telling me was that
so Charles Johnson's uncle apparently worked in the intelligence services, and then he knows a girl who worked for Gates. I mean, so many interconnected webs here. I don't believe Charles Johnson is just making this all up.
essentially you can tell when there are these Bolsonaro people because they always
Broach the topic of who benefits from this kind of stuff, who might be supporting it, or the geopolitical dynamics.
Yeah, so of course, right-wing movements are going to invoke nationalism and the flag and national symbols, right? That just makes sense. Oh, bloody hell. Let's move along here.
All right, how are you guys doing?
Going well, yeah.
This is a conversation between Richard Spencer and Charles Johnson. The title is Discourse Pollution. Apparently it was recorded January 10th. So I believe today I flew down here Monday, January 9th. Today is Wednesday, January 11th here in Australia.
What's today's topic going to be?
Well, yeah, I think it's going to be a lot. I mean, the speakers battle
Come
is
on.
old news to a degree, but I actually am interested in listening to Chuck talk about why he was firmly in support of Gates on that one. I mean, I offered my support in the sense that I found the whole thing
Comical?
and maybe deserved as well. Like, in the sense of McCarthy endorses Trumpism and January 6th after the revolution failed and just wants to ride the donkey but then not pay the price or something like that. I don't know.
I think Gates has, how do you pronounce his last name? Is it Matt Getz?
Or Gates.
Gates, yeah. He has his own political agenda, but I think it's sort of funny how he just threw like a spanner in the works, right? Like,
Come on, man.
like,
Give me the right. Just trying to get the right timestamp. I need to make this a high quality production.
my more conservative relatives just like listening to veg, you know.
That's like bad for the party.
Listening to conservatives everywhere. I'm listening to this from Italy, like, well,
Yeah, that's basically how I felt. The other thing that's of interest is the J6 phenomenon is clearly a global phenomenon. And there are obviously just so many connections between what happened in Brazil this past weekend and January 6th. Although the Brazilian one was a kind of pale echo in a way. There was nothing going on in Brasilia at the time. They're kind of cool, modern, hyper-modernist Capitol building. There was nothing actually going on, so there was no there was no steel to stop, as it were. And whereas Trump was being directly engaged, Bolsonaro was actually in Florida, apparently being hospitalized for a stomach issue. So,
is it wrong to suggest that maybe the Brazilian coup attempt was, shall we say, lazy? Is that too stereotypical? You know, they sort of did it after the new president was already sworn in. It's kind of an error, category error in coup. It was like an ex post facto coup. Yeah.
So having a hard time queuing it up to the right timestamp. Please forgive me for a little repetition here, and I'll run these first few minutes at 2x.
Well, I think the better word is chill, not lazy. Like, you know, it's chill. They're chillaxed doing it. Yeah, that's how I would describe it.
Well, what's so interesting about all these attempts is all the people with cameras. They like run in and they take pictures of everything, and it's just so it's so of our time, right? And like I'm going to record myself run in my building committing a crime. I think this will go well for me, you know.
Whatever happened to like the 80s style like successful coup, like or like the Pinochet coup, or like Argentinian helicopter rides, like none of that stuff happens now. You know?
Oh no, au contraire, my friend. I mean, that stuff happens all the time all throughout Africa. It's just done in all sorts of subtle ways by the United States and by other players.
I think correct.
I mean, it's not as thematic, right? It's not as like you know, it's not like the movies. It's more like, oh, we're going to shave a percentage point off here or there.
Yeah, and the chat is right that this discourse is wrong. Bolsonaro did concede. You know, the army had no interest in backing a Bolsonaro coup.
In this specific county, because we control the voting machines in Democratic Republic of Congo, say, right? It's like that kind of thing.
Right. You know, and this tribe's become a little inconvenient, so we're just gonna have to all that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, there's a real honest goodness war going on in the Democratic Republic of Congo right now, in large measure being fought by the United States and Britain against Netanyahu and Paul Kagame and all that over all the barrels that are in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So
I just want to say I'm not fan posting. I meant that as, you know, just as
no, that's all right. I mean, the feds know me, and let me tell you, as much I prefer having them as customers than as persecutors. So if we could keep it in that, you know, I'd rather be funded by the police rather than defunded them. Just to be technical, as my sort of day job is to build companies that do a lot of work with U.S. intelligence and law enforcement communities. So you know, that sort of gives you kind of my view on this. And you know, in the spirit of full disclosure, you know, I have publicly, you know, Clearview AI, which is a company I helped to co-found. You know, I called for them to make the facial recognition technology more widely available to society in Brazil and elsewhere to kind of identify who all these people were that sort of stormed the. What is it? It's like the Policia, or what the hell is the thing they actually stormed?
Brasilia. It's like a modernist utopian vision of a future society that looks kind of like a 1960s sci-fi movie. I've always found it kind of
I've been there before when I was quite young, when I was like 17 or so. Mm-hmm. And I just, all I remember from it is just how terribly hot it was and how giant the mosquitoes were and how there was so little shade anywhere. And so when I was seeing all the photos, I'd actually been to that building many years ago because my uncle was in the intelligence community and we went down there. And it was very interesting because we were sort of like walking around, and of course it's just kind of like, you know, it's Brazil, so no one's like really working, like, but they all make like attempts to appear like they're working. And then,
so normal news is what bureaucracies report and decide, right? Because news is a business. You get information that bureaucracies report and decide, and you package that against advertising. Yeah, it does look like Kevin McCarthy and Marjorie Taylor Greene are regularly hooking up because Kevin McCarthy is no longer wearing his wedding ring, and they seem very passionately, physically attached to each other. And you can see kind of those raw animal spirits that come out in their exchanges. And Kevin McCarthy, last time he didn't get the job as House Majority Speaker. Look at all those crabs. He didn't get the job because he was supposedly having an affair with fellow Congresswoman Renee Elmers, who then complained that he no longer had time for her.
The government, you know, government worker kind of overlay onto that, right, which is also like notorious for not working. But it's in like the middle of Brazil, like it's like way away from Rio or Sao Paulo. All the places you'd want to go in Brazil, like it's so far removed from that. So it's just it's a really interesting place. It's sort of like it's trying to be something that it's not really capable of being. Brazilian,
exactly. You know, it's trying to be the future as imagined in the mid 20th century. And so there's a certain kind of irony to it. There's also kind of interesting juxtaposition between the famous, you know, touchdown Jesus statue known around the world and then this hyper-modernist capital. There's a lot going on there.
You know, an ex-girlfriend of mine's father served in the Brazilian intelligence services. And so she and I were talking the other day about this whole setup. And, you know, she at one point worked for Congressman Gates. So it's sort of like, it's interesting how all these kind of things are connected. And anyway, what she was telling me was that essentially you can tell whether there are these Bolsonaro people because they always bring with them the flag of Brazil. And And that's very much in keeping with kind of our American boomers storming January 6th, right? They're all like festooned in their red, white, and blue, pants or bandanas or whatever. And I just find that very, very interesting how you can increasingly identify what kind of political persuasion somebody is just by their appeal to national symbols.
Yes. Well, let me get it.
Yeah, right. Nationalism tends to be right wing, so rally around the flag is not unusual. See the crabs scurrying when I shine the light of truth upon them.
Before we even broach the topic of who benefits from this kind of stuff or who might be supporting it or the geopolitical dynamics at play, let's just look at it as a phenomenon, because I think it's important to understand what's happening before you start analyzing it. So the comparisons between J6 are right on the nose. I mean, it's hard not to see this. It happened almost exactly on the second year anniversary, and it is a kind of populist revolt. It's deranged and organized, but also kind of disorganized. It's a mob that is moving into the capital to take their country back, and it was based on the notion of a stolen election, or which is combined with another notion, which is that the people who were rightfully elected are wild Marxists, so they're kind of illegitimate, no matter how the votes were counted, correctly or not. Also, there's this funny aspect that is worth noting, and I think it.
Okay, so I hear a lot of dissidents. They have no reason for them to fear you, that you don't eat them. So I noticed that a lot of people on the right tell me that Lula is far left, a communist. But when I read the New York Times, the mainstream media, I see Lula, the current leader of Brazil, described as a center-left centrist, kind of like Biden. So is Lula, far left commie or centrist? Inquiring minds want to know.
Very, 2023 or 2020, which is this weird contradiction between we're revolutionaries, but also we're not. And we're storm the Capitol, but we're also going to film ourselves. I mean, I noted that Big Delasco was actually sentenced to 60 days in prison recently, and he was
Today, in fact, yeah. Today.
Yes, today, and he was live streaming himself. Wasn't he in Nancy Pelosi's office?
I think that's right, yeah.
Or somewhere about that. So he's documenting the crime, and then afterwards, there's a lot of talk from him or supporters of Big Delasco was sentenced to 60 days in prison for walking into a public building or something. So it's this weird ambiguity where, on the one hand, it is a joke. I mean, I think it's fair to say that it was a joke. They're doing it for the lulz and putting their feet up on the desk or calling, using her phone, or whatever the hell they were doing. But then on the other hand, it is clearly it was clearly I don't want to say coup, but an attempt to cease the progress of government, and then also
it's so functionally illiterate about how the government works, right? Like, as if you could just take over a building and somehow you would be in power, right? In the United States of America, or even in Brazil for that matter, right?
Exactly.
I mean, it's such a weird idea, that the power resides in the building and not in the institutions.
Right. Or the power resides in a mob. Like, so much of what Trump, I mean, even if you take Trump's words charitably, what he wanted to do was march with his supporters arm in arm to the Capitol, basically discourage Mike Pence from going through with it and encourage the Trumpians in Congress to take his side. And you hear a lot of this from J6 apologists where they're like, well, yeah, it got out of hand and the function of government went forward, but the government should look at all these angry people and learn from that. Like, they can't put Joe Biden in office. Or, it's this kind of very illiterate and kind of naive and hokey notion of government.
Well, I mean, there is a certain sense in which this is being taken very seriously, and in which, what is that old Charles, Tully thing about how the state is the monopoly on the use of violence,
sure,
right? And there is something kind of violent about breaking and entering and defecating, in Nancy Pelosi's office for no question, right? So I think, to my mind, so for one thing, I mean, there is a certain sense in which the January 6th event and the January 8th event in Brazil is a form of kind of weaponized mental illness, and I don't think it's a coincidence that Netanyahu was in power when both incidents took place. I think that needs to be kind of understood in a serious kind of way, because Netanyahu.
I like that January 6th was weaponized mental illness. I think that's pretty funny. I don't think it was a coup. I don't think it was an insurrection. It was a riot.
Does a lot of the bidding of players like China and Russia, and of course, organized crime, which has its tentacles all throughout, Ukraine and Hungary, and of course into Israel itself. So, and you see the sort of shaman figure who emerges, right? The QAnon shaman, and then of course the Bolsonaro, shaman figure. And there's something just very, the Israelis and the Emiratis meet with Governor DeSantis, right, a week before Bolsonaro goes to his Orlando Publix, and is like eating Kentucky Fried Chicken. And so there's a certain sense in which like Florida is the sort of like respectable face of this sort of global international criminal syndicate.
Yeah.
And it's not lost on me that the Bolsonaros are trying to get Italian citizenship. They are, I think they're like half Italian or part Italian. And of course, there's a new kind of populist, prime minister lady there in Italy now, who has her through line with this sort of organized crime world. So I think we sort of need to understand this as kind of a transnational, network that operates. And one of the ways it operates is by sort of polluting the discourse with bots.
Wait a second. If it's mental illness, then mental illness in action, then it's not transnational. It's not some transnational organization. So he says, it's organized crime. It's basically, an organized crime mob. And it's mental illness in action. And it's also, the Republican Party big players in action. So can it really be all these things at once?
Human form and I suppose the robot form. That what they're trying to do is sort of like pollute the information ecosystem so that our sense-making apparatus is quite impoverished.
So that's not what the left is doing, right? When they're trying to redefine language and change words and dominate the high ground of culture. It's not because the left is engaging in semantic warfare. Well, I guess one difference is, the left is not, trying to pollute the discourse. They're just trying to elevate the discourse. They're trying to educate. Yep, just conspiracy theories not even worthy of theory. Okay, I can't argue with that. But Charles Johnson here talking with Richard Spencer about pollution, discourse pollution. Probably make a pretty good argument that this is discourse pollution.
And the state, of course, has all these other weapons at its disposal: facial recognition, satellite technology, to say nothing of sort of like the hacking tools that can be deployed on people's phones. And so there's a certain sense in which like the state is like much stronger than these people's feeble attempts to sort of like cause chaos. But I do think that there's a certain sense in which like the chaos is kind of the point, and to try to like get everyone fighting is kind of the point. And when we last spoke, I mentioned the Wang Huning stuff about America versus America, America against America. Wang Huning, being the third most popular person in China, talks an awful lot about triggering civil wars in other countries by basically getting everyone to fight with one another. And there's a certain sense in which like that is very much a feature of the modern era that basically people.
Yeah, it would make sense that Russia and China and America's competitors and enemies would want to encourage movements in America that weaken America. So I don't think that's terribly surprising.
Tribally grew up, they then go to battle against one another, whether it's physically in the form of the Proud Boys and the Antifa, or whether or not it's in the sort of like, information landscape that we see playing out on Twitter. Who shall own Twitter? How shall it be funded that they own Twitter? All that kind of question. So I guess what I would just say, like thinking about this, is I think January 6th was a sort of failure of our system, of basically being rational, being sensible. And then the January 7th inauguration of, Kevin McCarthy, who is himself like very obviously a part of this transnational organized crime syndicate.
Yeah, now I find that just bizarre, a huge overstatement, like without sufficient evidence that like Kevin McCarthy and Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump are all part of this like international crime syndicate. All right, I think that is completely out to lunch, meaning that there's no evidence provided for these wild accusations. And so this is unreasonable and irresponsible, I think, of Charles Johnson. But he's fun to listen to because out of that nonsense, there are also some good points.
Look at like all the fraud he's committed over the years, directing state monies to himself through having his brother-in-law claim to be Native American, so he and his wife can get paid for blowing this construction company. I mean, it's just like basic bitch, kind of mob tactics that you see, and they're just on full display. And whether that's always been there, which I somewhat suspect, or whether we're just sort of being more aware of it because of the nature of the open source research world or the cell phone proliferation, or the camera proliferation, I couldn't say. But it does seem to me like we're entering this kind of new moment, and I think we'll look back on this year, basically based on these last 2 years, as basically the same way that people look back upon, say, 2008 or perhaps like 1991 even, with the fall of the Soviet Union. It seems like things are getting very scrambled in real time, and the playbooks are being rewritten. And that is, I think, just an extremely exciting time to really think about what's going on. And I don't know, my basic read on it is that the state can't lose, but that we are discovering that we have a lot of weaponized mentally ill people within our country that are actual security threats. Whereas previously they would just like yell at at Fox News, or they would complain in the comment section. They're actually like getting out and doing things, and that's kind of disturbing, to put it mildly.
Yeah, let me before you go on, let me jump in on that, because what is propaganda is a very interesting question, and I've mentioned this before on other talks. Jacques Ellul has a very interesting book on propaganda, and he was writing in the 20th century, so he kind of imagined propaganda as necessary for technological society. Propaganda is the 5 p.m. nightly news where Walter Cronkite tells you, what.
Look, this society sets meaning for the word marriage, for military. So it used to be marriage was a heterosexual institution. It used to be that our military was a heterosexual institution. And now our society has radically changed that. So for the first time in human history, essentially, we're now defining marriage as something that can occur between a man and a man and a woman and a woman. We've now redefined our military service to be something that's no longer a heterosexual institution. So society is constantly changing the meaning of words and the meaning of what it is to be a good person and a good citizen.
What's down, what's left, what's right. He kind of gives you a frame of reference, and it can maintain order. I mean, with a technological and urbanized society, we don't have peasants out in the land going to a cathedral and worshiping something that they barely understand. We need them to work 9 to 5, and so we need to kind of organize people in a new way to make this thing work. Otherwise, it really won't. Now, we obviously have like the more popular version.
Society? Do I mean commies? No, society. Society sets the meaning. So the primary value in America, for example, is freedom. That's not the primary value here in Australia. The primary value here is fairness. So there are all sorts of words that mean fair in Australia and New Zealand. Australia and New Zealand are societies dedicated to fairness. America is a society dedicated to freedom. And there are different understandings of freedom, but it comes from within society. It's not just commies who change the meaning of words and the meaning of institutions, all right? People on the right do that too, right? Society is what gives us our hero system. So if you're an American, you get your sense of transcendence in large part by being part of America. This is something that's going to go on long past our lives, and we can feel good that we're part of this world dominating power, and we get meaning from enacting rituals like the 4th of July, talking about the Declaration of Independence, we're talking about the Constitution. This is a society dedicated to, freedom and liberty, all right? It's society that sets the terms of, what most of us take for granted.
Again, it's just lies. So let's say there's a massive grain shortage in the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union puts out a propaganda, statement in Pravda or something. Grain has never been more plentiful, massive record-breaking harvest. And so people read that, and it's just like a direct contrast between reality, and I don't know, maybe they go insane, or maybe they believe it, or maybe they think to themselves, well, what am I doing wrong? Like, maybe I'm left out of this, I'm missing out on the bounteous profits.
The so-called hyper-normalization, right, that they talk about, where everything is its opposite. And,
yes.
And I think that is very much a feature of our time as well, right?
Well, I think it's a little bit different, though, because it's not a direct lie. Like, because I'm not trying to defend, Trumpism or Fox News or people spreading QAnon or something. I'm not trying to defend them,
But yeah, Richard is nostalgic for the Trump era when he was a big deal, and it was an exciting time.
Trying to understand them, but it's not like you're sitting there impoverished, starving, and then someone puts like a virtual reality goggles on your head, and they show you a picture of like a bounteous grain harvest, and they're like, eat up, eat this digital wheat. It's not that insanely obvious. It's different. Like they call upon half-truths and like pre-existing anxieties. But as you mentioned, there's a way in which there's a golem like quality to people where they can kind of put a word into this person's mouth, and then the golem kind of like is animated and walks around and kicks people's asses. So it's like.
Yeah, as the chat says, language continually evolves. Conservatives like to keep things the same. Commies are not conservative. Well, conservative ideology harkens back to a much better past. All right, but conservatives are also changing meanings and changing words. So individuals, communities, societies are constantly, evolving different meaning and different language and changing the meaning of language.
there are pre-existing anxieties right now in the 21st century. There are pre-existing racial anxieties. There's no doubt about it. Demographic anxieties. There are generational anxieties. We have an older population. How do we even understand these young people? There are, cultural anxieties of that kind. There are anxieties about not understanding the national security state. Are we funding ISIS? Like, what's going on here? Why didn't we invade Syria? But then we're supporting these rebels who are Islamicists. I don't understand. Isn't that like Osama bin Laden? There's a lot of understandable confusion about the world we live in and how this is going to operate. And I think what contemporary propaganda does is it gets at some pre-existing anxiety and just presses. It's like you have a little wound. You're generally fine, but you have this big cut on your arm, and someone just comes and just presses on that cut, that wound, and you're kind of disabled.
So Richard has a much more exaggerated sense of the importance of propaganda than I do. So I hold with that French neuroscientist who wrote the terrific book Not Born Yesterday. We did not evolve to be gullible. All right, we did not, evolve to just, take some, nifty piece of propaganda and automatically accept it as true. Well, I'm really getting the sense here, people, that the tide is coming in, and my position will eventually become perilous, and I will need to retreat to higher ground. So maybe I should start building a strategic retreat.
Things that you wouldn't otherwise do. And so they'll call upon, like our demographic racial anxiety, and there's no solution offered, but they'll call upon it and just activate people. And so you have people who are like concerned about the change of generations, or my town doesn't look the same, people are speaking Spanish, and next thing you know, they're invading the Capitol in a way on behalf of this cause. Or, demographic anxiety is going crazy, the great replacement, but that kind of means that the election's stolen. So they kind of like, they take something that's true in a way and then press on that and kind of inflate it into something that is both untrue, but also kind of actionable, not in the legal sense, but in the sense of like, it will spur you to do something. You worry about it.
Go ahead. Yeah, I mean, what I would just say, so look, I think a lot of the January 6th thing happened because the COVID lockdowns happened, right? And the Black Lives Matter protests happened. And there's this sort of thing with conservatives where they want to sort of be rebellious, right? They sort of want, they always talk about, Hunter Biden's crimes, but never, Donald Trump's crimes, right? There's this certain like, you do it too, two-cock, style argument. And which is of course like a fallacy, right? It doesn't really quite work. And so, they're always basically like saying, well, we also do these terrible things. And there's a sort of like, obsession with Hunter Biden, right? Who seemingly like enjoys himself a little too much, probably because of some measure of drug addiction and other issues, probably dealing with the death of his beloved brother. So there's a certain sense in which like the conservative just wants to act out, right? Just wants to misbehave. And you see this with like Hereticon, Peter Thiel's outfit where they all hang out in Miami and they sort of pretend to be cool and interesting, talking about interesting ideas, but it's all the same kind of warmed over libertarianism with the techno sheen, for the modern era. Or you see it in the Sam Bankman-Fried of all the ugly people forming the polycule just to rip people off and like, have sex out in the Bahamas, right? So there's a certain sense in which like the conservative basically wants to cut loose and like have a good time and be exciting. And, you look over like the 2020 cycle, there are all these people who are like locked in their houses with their iPhones, watching Fox News, being sort of mesmerized, right? And like, let's be real here, like the Scotch Irish have always had a tendency to be mesmerized. That's what the revival meetings were about. I mean, there's a great, Sinclair Lewis book about Elmer Gantry, who's a traveling salesman, who's essentially a con man, right? But he ends, he sort of LARPs as a revival preacher and kind of ultimately like becomes a true believer, like he converts himself in a way. And that is very much like American life right now, where you can LARP, you can dress up, right? You can cosplay as like some sort of revolutionary. And it's partly because, like, we actually don't need people to go work 9 to 5. Like, we actually function pretty well as a society with a whole lot of people basically, like, hopped up on opioids and, like, basically strung out.
So, yeah, I remember listening to a lecture on marketing, and it says you don't market to people as they are. You market to people as to what they aspire to be. And we aspire to be, important. Would a shark eat me if I went in? Possibly. So yeah, it looks like the surface of the moon. But I just find it's a tremendous source of energy to be right next to the ocean.
Sprung out internally online, right? We actually, it's actually kind of worked pretty well. Notwithstanding the fact that we have so many people who just don't work or who are, essentially just sort of like underemployed, if you will. And so what happens is you have this sort of idle richness or idle middle class, really. Lots and lots of the people who were at January 6th had financial difficulties in some form or another, and mental health difficulties in some form.
Yeah, very little wind right now, which accounts for the high quality audio levels of this stream.
Basically, in my view, kind of like pre-selected
And so the temperature is about 76 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's about 24, 48, about 23, 24 degrees Celsius. Okay, you do hear the wind. It's very low, very, very weak wind right now. It's about 5 p.m. Wednesday afternoon, January 11th, and we're about 10 miles from the Sydney Opera House, 10 miles south.
The QAnon cult and all these other weird psyops that were running against them through Twitter or Facebook. And whereas, the U.S. government is trying to figure out how to get everyone checks in their bank accounts, or trying to figure out, how do we distribute everybody food through Amazon. Mark Zuckerberg and to a lesser extent Jack Dorsey were just sort of...
And you say, you bet the fish are biting. Well, there was an Australian singer named Slim Dusty, and he had a classic song, "A bad day's fishing meets a good day's working anytime."
Ignoring this crazy psyop, which is fun and exciting and kind of related, of course, are exciting. Or having your palm reads done is exciting, right? And there's a certain sense in which it's just people just trying to fill up the day, do something exciting. They're basically trickling forward. Now, there are other factors that we kind of get into in different countries that kind of use these moments as basically, fertile ground for their own, struggle against America, right? Clearview identified maybe within 6, different hostile intelligence.
And Slim Dusty also had another Aussie classic, "G'day, g'day, g'day, g'day." Walking down the street, buying a paper, having a smoke, and just saying "G'day, g'day, g'day." What's the #1 selling Mark Shapiro book in Australia? Changing the Immutable.
Being present at January 6th. And there's sort of all these crazy people that show up to document things, to photograph things. Not least of which is probably our own kind of complicated, intelligence services. I mean, it is, kind of like the canard that Darren Beattie goes on about the Fed's direction. But it's undoubtedly clear that there were Feds there as well, right? That there were sort of members of our own intelligence apparatus. They were also kind of LARPing as law enforcement to a certain extent, when they weren't LARPing as federal informants, right? Or as so there's a certain sense in which this is a giant flag, and it's sort of participatory. It's very postmodern, and it's ultimately kind of extremely participatory in a way that I think democracy on the whole is kind of not. It's sort of you go, the public service people want to show up in person, right? Because they want to get that sticker and they want to feel good about themselves. But we're in a world now where you can just send in your vote, who cares, right? Yeah. And so they want to participate in some form of civic life, but because Jump Lodge is shut down, they can't go bowling, right? They can't, even the bars are shut down. So there's just an ennui and boredom to their lives. And here was a great big spectacle that they could go and run that.
Whoa!
And they could go to sporting events, right? So there's a certain sense in which this is what was really driving a lot of it. And I think it's ultimately why we don't really see a lot of these disturbances now, right? Because things are basically back to normal for all intents and purposes. You can basically go to sporting events and restaurants and bars and all the sort of bourgeois or even lower class joys that we all kind of enjoy. Those are now available again. So there's just not as much of an opportunity for a January 6th style moment.
So I've been polluted by some of my, past journalistic beats. So I get to a beautiful place like this, and I immediately think, this would be a great place to, shoot a scene from a movie.
So I don't know. My sense, just kind of looking it over on the 2-year anniversary, is I think the intelligence services want this to be another 9/11 or sort of Pearl Harbor, if you will, and perhaps that's the case. Perhaps we saw a number of intelligence agencies, domestic intelligence agencies that were penetrated by foreign actors. It certainly seems that way. The Secret Service, the DHS agents that were there participating in the sort of insurrection, if you want to call it that. But I guess the issue is there really wasn't that much loss of.
Yes, I read that Ron Jeremy is being ruled unfit to stand trial due to dementia, and I have no insight on that. I never witnessed any dementia with Ron Jeremy, but I haven't had any interactions with him since 2007.
Loss of life, right? I mean, you have Ashley Babbitt, who's sort of a crazy person who was shot in the head. It was the only real casualty. I mean, I suppose you could argue that the officers who died or committed suicide afterwards were sort of an ancillary, answer.
Yeah, it's hard not to argue that to me. When conservatives push back on that, I mean, a lot of these people died of heart attacks or suicide the day of or days after. It's hard not to argue that wasn't directly.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, but you think.
Yeah, but it's not the same as they were killed. All right, someone who commits suicide or dies of a heart attack in a time of extreme stress, you can't say that they were killed by January 6th. You can say that January 6th played a role.
you think about just a very large group of people, right, converging on a particular place, right, and like there are going to be heart attacks and suicides thereafter, just by sheer numbers, right? If you have, you know, so my point is like our security apparatus wants this to be another 9/11, and you know, to some extent, I think there's some cases to be made, but the problem is that the counterintelligence technologies and things that need to be done require basically peering into, you know, to the psyche or even maybe even the souls of some of the people who were there. And that is a place that is like very difficult to get at with modern technology. Right? Like, how do you understand like the heiress who flies there, right, with her like private?
Like, what are the most exotic sites used for, you know, illicit purposes? Well, they're like photographers who, you know, get nude people to, you know, pose all over the world. So like the South Pole, the North Pole, the Antarctica, the Arctic, the Western Wall, God forbid, the Louvre. All right, so there's this photographer, and he got the most opposition and the most law enforcement pushback when he tried to do, you know, nude photos in first world countries, and he got the least pushback in non-first world countries. So he got very quick law enforcement response in France. So in Bondi Beach, which is about 8 miles north of here, the photographer got permission from the city council. They changed the law so that about 2,000 people could gather naked to pose for a photograph. Maybe it is to oppose global warming or something.
How do you understand like the bored 80-year-old guy who scaled the wall, like, you know, in a feat of like daring do or whatever? Like, how do you really understand these people? And I think you have to understand it as like this sort of like crazed American id, you know, coming to rest in this like crazy moment because we just had elected this crazy president, and that we're basically now in a moment where the intelligence services have used Joe Biden, you know, who has always been an ally of theirs, and they have basically reasserted control. And so we are now living in a kind of like a society where we talk about democracy a lot, but like we all kind of know that the intelligence services in our country really call the shots. And we see that with the Twitter files, right? Like how everyone feels about Elon Musk being compromised. And you know, I've written about that. I've talked about it.
Yeah, this is an interesting perspective about how interpenetrated the intelligence agencies are with our lives.
There is a certain sense in which people understand now, in a way that they probably didn't understand before, how much our intelligence services are involved in everyday life. And I think that is what makes this moment very exciting and very interesting. And of course, it's consistent with 1991.
Yeah, upon people normal. No, not really. Right? You may not necessarily notice all sorts of pathologies upon meeting them, but the number one distinguishing characteristic is that they lack human ties and connections. So if you have close ties with your family, you have close ties with your church, your synagogue, your kin, your profession, your educational institution, you know, your ethnic, religious, any type of community, right? You have close friends. You're very unlikely to engage in, you know, pornography work.
As the former CIA director become president, right? And he was president for a while until, you know, Ross Perot was himself and compromised, you know, ran and basically gave away the So there's anyway. The point I'm trying to make is
so it's not that they're loners. They find community and connection in the porn industry, just like heroin addicts often refer to, you know, their fellow heroin addicts as a type of family. And Charles Manson, all right, he created a family. So you got a bunch of dysfunctional people who find solace with each other because you're all, you know, similarly dysfunctional. And so you may feel the outside world is shunning you, so you create a new family within, you know, the world of heroin, the world of drugs, the world of pornography, or, you know, whatever illicit world is that you want to reside. You'll find your new family there.
We are now in a very new era, and what was exciting about the whole Gates, you know, McCarthy fight is that there's a sort of view that like, hey, maybe the Congress can be participatory. Maybe we can actually be glued to these kind of fights. Maybe we can have real debates about subjects. But I think we kind of owe in our hearts that the whole thing is that was a sort of performative kind of play as well.
Yeah, oh, definitely. I mean, look, many people, if we transition a little bit too, which has happened this past week, I mean, many people made this criticism of Gates. What exactly do you want? With these rule changes, you've gotten them in many ways. Like, who are you? You want Trump the speaker? You want Biggs? What is this all about? Is this purely personal?
So, no, violence isn't necessarily common among heroin addicts or, you know, porn people, but you would expect it to be more common than among, you know, doctors, lawyers, and bankers. So you're dealing with a lot of people with low impulse control.
Or purely narcissistic in the sense that, for a week there, Matt Gaetz was on the lips of everyone who's politically engaged, which is a remarkable thing.
Before this moment, right? By the way, Matt Gaetz just literally texted me, by the way, which was somewhat funny.
You might be listening it.
I don't know. I mean, he is that narcissistic. I mean, I might be,
But yeah, Matt Gaetz is friends with Charles Johnson, who's speaking here with Richard Spencer.
I can tell you that is. I mean, the politicians are a special breed of narcissists because they just. I mean,
look, narcissism is usually not a condition, it is a state. It is a state, right, which is temporary. It's a state that depends upon situation. So if you're a politician, that is a particular state where you're going to be looking for applause and positive feedback and feel, somewhat entitled to, extra levels of admiration. So most narcissists are not chronically narcissistic. They are narcissistic with respect to certain things, such as their social media production, or their position in the community, or their position in church or synagogue, or in business, or in sports, or in politics. Do I think the racial aspects of porn being propagated, or is it the culture? Well, there is a demand for kicks. People, demand things that get them excited. So the pornography industry does not require, high IQ, specially trained people to produce its content. It's low IQ, hard on fuel, and it's largely responsive to what the consumer wants.
It never stops with the politician class. It's like many of us have our moments where we're maybe a bit braggadocious or whatever, but we also can take the piss on ourselves. That's never the case with many of these politicians. You never see it happen. So anyway, what I think, look, Kevin McCarthy is deeply corrupt. Laura Loomer, others have made this point. We could belabor it if we had to, but basically, he's from, essentially Bakersfield mob territory. He's a sort of working class kid who basically
I've never even heard of the Bakersfield mob. Do they whack a lot of people? Do you know anything about the Bakersfield mob? Should we be worried about the Bakersfield mob?
Through the political system, not unlike George Santos, who we can't really criticize because they never throw stones at one another because they all live in glass houses, right? Mm-hmm. And so with Gaetz, what makes Gaetz interesting is he never tells you what he really wants, and I think that is kind of frightening in a certain sense because we're used to people just giving it all away, right? We're used to the confessional camera, right? Like in the sitcom where people just kind of lay out what they really think, and that's not happening here. So it's deeply frustrating and disturbing in a way, right? But as somebody who knows him, his attitude was, this is an opportunity to basically smoke out everyone on the Kevin McCarthy question of whether or not we are going to have a criminal guy run the sort of speakership. And of course it's personal. Palmer Luckey is one of Kevin McCarthy's largest donors. Palmer Luckey is the brother-in-law of Matt Gaetz. Right. Ginger Luckey being Matt Gaetz' wife. Palmer Luckey, of course, is heavily dependent on Kevin McCarthy getting in there so that he can get military contracts and other things from the border. Right. They're trying to grift off of the U.S. border. The sort of Republican world is trying to grift off of the U.S. border. So there's that element of it. So there's the sort of business side, personal side. There's also just the generational aspects. Gaetz is essentially a sort of older millennial. I think McCarthy is peak Gen X. Right. And so you sort of have that dynamic as well. And then you have, Gaetz is both supporting Trump, but also burying Trump in a way, right? Because he's putting up Trump as Speaker of the House material, and he's the only person to vote for him, right? Mm-hmm. And that video of him nominating Trump is, of course, going to be used when Matt eventually runs for governor of Florida and all the redneck areas that love Trump in kind of the same way that the black.
Yeah, so initially I thought, that'd be awesome if Donald Trump became Speaker of the House, but then I realized being Speaker of the House requires all sorts of organization that Donald Trump just does not seem capable of.
Blacks loved Obama, right? And so that was very performative too in a way. So in a certain sense though, we smoked a lot of people out, right? We see, Dan Crenshaw losing his patience and calling people terrorists and enemies, right? Sort of which is sort of always the neocon kind of approach, is to basically make everyone an enemy. And he loses his committee, right? Doesn't end up becoming the head of Homeland Security, which happened the other day. And then you have the kind of people who are probably spooks, probably feds, still within the Republican coalition that don't really want to vote for McCarthy because they know that it's going to go very poorly. But then he figures out kind of weird ways of buying them off. And you sort of saw one by one they fell. Earlier we had Olivia Beavers, point out that this GOP billionaire Thomas Peterfy, is that how you say his name? He's a Hungarian-born billionaire. Has large mob ties, very plugged in with kind of a high finance world. and he's like sending these people who are the 20 holdouts against McCarthy. He's sending them a text message basically saying that if you don't vote for Kevin, we're going to like primary you and take you out, right?
Oh, I saw that. Yeah,
And it's
signed it like big donors or something.
Yes, big donors, top,
Yeah.
right? And it's like these are the kind of people that we're talking about and dealing with. And of course, very old world kind of thing. And Gates just texted me really interesting numbers from CBS poll. 64% of GOP voters approved of the speaker's turmoil last week. Makes sense. As one.
So does Matt Gaetz realize that he's texting his friend Charles Johnson, who's currently in dialogue with Richard Spencer?
Republican told me Gates has more fans in their district than Kevin McCarthy. So really, it just comes
I
down
imagine that's true.
comes down to like just basic bitch. Who's more popular and who's going to be the real leader. And then finally, from that perspective, we've talked. I've written about this and talked about this, but Matt was targeted by the Israelis in large measure because of his vote against the Iran war. He was one of 3 Republicans to oppose going to war in Iran. The Israelis did not like that under Netanyahu. They wanted their war with Trump, and Matt was very steadfast in opposing that.
Wait, when did we vote on going to war in Iran? I don't recall that vote. And I suspect that the Israelis as a collective are not strongly opposed to Matt Gaetz.
Met with the president, President Trump, many times and tried to dissuade him from that. Ultimately prevailed. And they sort of set about targeting him over his, shall we say, Hunter Biden-esque, not quite, maybe, but sort of like heterosexual republicanism, which is, of course, a contradiction in terms recently. And
Wow, I didn't know that Matt Gaetz was heterosexual.
they sort of came at him with everything they had. And, of course, it led to Bill Barr, who has his own connections with the Israelis through his father and through his Opus Dei connections. And it led to him sort of open.
Oh yeah, Opus Dei. We all know that Opus Dei, this Roman Catholic organization, absolutely in bed with Israel.
Failing to prosecute Matt under the Biden years, under the Biden government. Sort of first order of business of the Biden government was declining to prosecute Congressman Matt Gaetz. And so what's interesting to me about all of this is that by basically having a high drama in the speaker's fight, Matt essentially transitions from basically being this guy who, all of the bots say that he sleeps with 17-year-olds. He transitions from that to basically being seen favorably by the base of the Republican Party, which is exactly the position you want to be in if you want to be governor or even president.
Right. Also, it's MAGA getting away from the GOP. That's interesting about that poll. I'll just take his word for it that a very strong majority supported the speaker's battle, but it was denounced over and over again by Fox News. I think Tucker might have kind of played a little both sides or something like that.
The important thing to understand about Fox is that
but Tucker thought that this week-long Republican fight over who would become the speaker, he didn't think it was so bad. Just thought it was democracy in action and that it would make everybody better.
Is that Fox, has recently taken $100 million from the Bank of China. Rupert Murdoch is now in his 90s, right? So he's no spring chicken anymore. And then they of course have the Dominion lawsuit, coming for them, right?
It's $1 billion lawsuit.
Yeah. It will bankrupt Fox if I've been following the filings in that, and at pretty much every single level, Fox has lost every single motion. So I think we're going to look back at the Dominion lawsuit in much the same way we look at Thiel's fight with Gawker, right? As sort of a counterintelligence measure masquerading as a litigation fight.
Sure.
Yeah, but Fox is 1,000 times bigger than Gawker. It has 1,000 times more resources to deal with the Dominion lawsuit. They'll settle when they need to.
Sure. And I think, you look at Hannity's interview where he admits, or he's deposed, and he admits that basically he was lying the whole time. He always believed that Joe Biden was duly elected. And that is just so revealing of the Boomer Fox person, right? And you can kind of see that with, the Lauren Boebert interview, where Hannity is sort of beating up on this, 34-year-old mom, right? Who's, attractive in the way that, kind of white trash women.
Yeah, you don't have to be a member of the House of Representatives to be the Speaker of the House of Representatives, as I understand it.
And he's beating her up in this very grotesque way because he's clearly being told that he needs to be, a pro-Kevin McCarthy.
So I'm not sure he's saying that the Dominion lawsuit will sink Fox. Obviously, it won't do that. But he's saying that it's a national intelligence hit against Gawker or against Fox, which I'm highly skeptical of all his conspiracy theorizing here. But maybe there's some gold in all the dross.
So anyway, it's just interesting. And of course, Gates' speech about Kevin believing in nothing is, of course, exactly right about the modern Republican Party, which is they don't believe in anything other than, the grift continue.
Yes. Well, what do you think about this, though? Couldn't you make another argument that Gates's revolution was deconstructive of the state, kind of in a way that it wasn't quite appreciate it at the time. Fox's criticism was basically, this looks bad. That was pretty much it. But there's a kind of deeper criticism. I mean, there's going to be, I think in June or something, a debt ceiling issue. And, usually that's something people talk about, and they're like, oh my God, we're 30 trillion in debt or whatever. And then they just kind of move forward, kicking the can once again. But, actually, and I don't think we're going to have like hyperinflation the next morning or something like that, or global instability the next morning. But like, not going through the debt ceiling in a regular, seemingly responsible manner, that actually is very significant. There is discussion, there's always been discussion of reducing entitlements, Social Security being the ultimate third rail in the Republican Party. I mean, was this...
When was the last time 40 done with a minion? About a month, right? There weren't any minyanim to be found in central Queensland. So yeah, someone would have to resign from the House of Representatives, and then Donald Trump could be appointed. Right, but there's no way that Donald Trump would be cut out to be Speaker of the House. Just requires too much organization.
It's a way of a certain class, a certain donor group that really wants to deconstruct the administrative state, as Bannon calls it, or the entitlement state, and using populism as a hammer to achieve that. But that's not something that I support, for what it's worth. But it does seem like there might be a kind of darker element to it.
No, nor do I. And I mean, look, Kevin McCarthy raised $500 million, right? And essentially just got a 5-seat majority in the House, right? Yeah. And everybody knows that going into 2024.
Well, Republicans still got, more than 1 percentage point more votes in the midterms than the Democrats. So it wasn't quite the disaster that we're being told. There was a significant, Republican turnout. Democrats turned out as well, but overall, as I understand it, Republicans got 1% more votes in the midterm.
24, he will lose speakership. Like it is more or less a guarantee. And that's before we're talking about various members who may well be indicted. Like George Santos is subject of domestic, local, state, federal, and international inquiries right now, given his connections to Brazil.
He had no money and then donated $700,000 to his own campaign over the course of a year. I mean, it stinks to high heaven. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious that he is a sort of construct of a form. But right. But anyway, so I know Hakeem Jeffries, one of Hakeem Jeffries' best friends. We were chatting the other day, and his view is basically like, look, Hakeem thinks he could well be speaker by the end of the year. He thinks there may be enough indictments, resignations, what have you, among Republicans that he could just sort of like luck into it. And I kind of laughed about it, but I don't think he's wrong. If you just kind of look like district by district, and yeah, I think there's a real question there about some special elections that could be held. There's sort of like there's lots of sort of questions there that could be approached. Now,
yeah, that's kind of scary. So Republicans only have a 5-seat majority. Right, Democrats only need to pick up three of those, right, to swing it to 4 or 5. To swing it to Hakeem Jeffries, and the Democrats would regain control of the lower chamber.
In normal societies, when a party fails to perform, right, in normal parliamentary systems, right, normal countries, when they fail to perform, even below expectations, there's a sacking of the leader of the party, right?
Right.
This is sort of like, but we don't really have that system, and so there's a way of looking at like the Gates-McCarthy fight as basically what we have to resort to when we don't have parties that actually discipline themselves. And McCarthy belongs very much to the donor, to the billionaire class. He doesn't make any.
So yeah, the parties have a lot more power in Australia and England than in the United States.
He basically sees himself as their kind of handmaid. And you can see that with, his employees who've gone to go work for Silver Lake, a very Chinese, firm. And so you can see this kind of, throughout his many, many years of public life, where he's always on the side of organized crime, always on the side of the Chinese, generally.
Wait. So he just tosses this off that Kevin McCarthy is always on the side of organized crime, but he doesn't seem to provide any evidence for such outrageous accusations.
And he installed a Chinese spy, this guy Peter Kuo, at the California GOP, so he could give his wife a no-show job in the California GOP. And of course, people noticed, he's hugging Marjorie Taylor Greene, she who was recently divorced and who, not even a year ago opposed him for the speakership, right? And he's not wearing his wedding ring in all the photos where he's hugging her. And so it's just like, people know.
What are you suggesting?
It's pretty obvious that they're having sex. And which is, at a healthy level, I support that. I think it's good to have a heterosexual Republican Speaker of the House who's not a child molester, like Denny Hester, right?
But it is kind of gross to think about. But
it is gross, but it's also very revealing, right? And so,
if someone said there's a sex scandal going on with, Penelope Cruz, there's a love triangle between Penelope Cruz, Margot Robbie, and Ryan Gosling, I'd be like, ooh, I don't read about this.
Yeah, you would read that page 6 story.
Kevin McCarthy screwing MTG. I'm like, ugh.
Yeah, I mean, you want the aesthetic sex scandal, but you get Martin Taylor Greene and Kelly McCarthy.
Yeah, exactly.
You want the AOC sex scandal, but you never quite get.
Right.
It's like worse than disappointment. Or the Anapolina Luna sex scandal. But anyway, so now that we've debased ourselves, but basically, the point.
And the chat says, this guy, Charles Johnson, he's just a Twitter troll. He's a Twitter troll who often breaks big stories.
Thing was like making everybody reveal their positions, right? And basically making everyone.
He's not a nobody. He's good friends with Matt Gaetz. He introduced Matt Gaetz to his wife.
And visible to the electorate, and sort of moving past Trump, past McCarthy, into this sort of new generation of leadership. I mean, there was a sort of high drama moment where Gaetz basically took it away from McCarthy, one last time, right? Where he basically waited so he could be the deciding vote, and then sort of stabbed Kevin, right? Mm-hmm. And you could just sort of see it on C-SPAN how exciting, how dramatic it was. And like this is sort of like we're not accustomed to this in the sort of bloodless, passionless, politics of our Congress, right? Where basically it's just like how many trillions you're going to vote on. Now, does this actually imperil the economics of the United States or the sort of public finance of the United States? I don't think so. I mean, honestly, like the U.S. dollar is extremely strong. There's all these terrible countries around the world that are seemingly imploding. So their rich people are decamping for the United States with money in tow. You just sort of like look at the fundamentals of our economy, and if it's not a Chinese sector, like the tech industry, commercial real estate, right, which are both heavily backed by the Chinese, more or less the economy is like going along. Like prices are kind of higher than they should be, but maybe that's because of consolidation, of a lot of our agricultural and sort of like consumer goods world. So yeah, I mean, we were all told that we were going to like be in a major recession by now by the Republican Party, and it's just like kind of not true. Like prices of housing is coming down in a large extent. There's a lot of like positive things. I mean, Trump talked about like bringing all these factories to the Midwest, but like Biden has actually allocated funding for it. Trump talked about infrastructure. Biden actually like got an infrastructure deal done. So there's just like a certain sense in which like Biden has basically taken a lot of the thunder out of the people who actually want to like find solutions to make America actually great again. And he sort of divided the people who are just sloganeering or the people who believe in nothing. And it's telling to me that the first actions of the new Congress is to gut the ethics committee, right? That was sort of action number one. And action number two was to basically get rid of all these IRS agents, because essentially the Republican Party is filled with a bunch of tax cheats. Mm-hmm. Like how revealing, how obvious, but how revealing.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, what is your sense? I mean, looking at it just sort of like, what is your sense of like who the real leader is of the Republican Party now? Is there one? I mean, how should we think about this?
I don't think there is one, because even...
Yeah, I think Donald Trump is still the leader until he's dethroned, I assume, by Ron DeSantis.
Underestimated the willingness of the Frankenstein's monster to move beyond Frankenstein. I was about to say Frankenstein. I was saw some highlights of Mel Brooks' classic movie. What I mean by that is that, in 2015 and for the first half of 2016, Trump was an antagonistic force to the RNC, but also to Fox News. I mean, remember that Megyn Kelly thing that the battle that he won effectively by just being a boorish jerk and talking about menstruation or whatever he accused her of. That was a setup to end him, basically. And they're like, oh, look, we can have Megyn Kelly. She's super popular. She'll kind of call upon the romantic, patriarchal instincts of Republicans and accuse him of being mean to women and things like that. And he just played it off by being even yet more mean. And he won those battles, but there was an antagonistic force against him. By the summer of 2016, that had flipped, and Fox News really was, Trump propaganda, basically. And for most of his term, or all of his term, effectively, it operated like that. And I see even now, Trump has been wounded, maybe fatally, just due to all of it that's happened over the past 6 years. And he's kind of like Frankenstein's monster is almost like moving off him. They're doing things in the name of him, but things that he explicitly does not support. And they kind of think that they can move away from him. Like it's really about us. And he told them that it's about you. They hate me because they hate you kind of stuff. He told them all these things, and it's kind of happening in a way that I didn't predict. I kind of was one of these guys who said there's no Trumpism without Trump. I kind of still believe that, but at least in the short term, I'm wrong. I mean, they're moving away from him. I don't think there's any leadership in the Republican Party. It's certainly not Kevin McCarthy. It's dubiously Trump, and it might even be someone like Gaetz at this point. So I think it's absolutely in flux, whereas with the DNC, it's not at all.
Yes, I think that's right. I mean, I think so it's always challenging, right? Because I posted a picture of myself with Gaetz. I mean, we've known each other for quite a while. I introduced him to his wife. We are friends, right? But we're also one always has to be objective about these things, right? And so for me, I just look at it very, very, very simply. right? Which is that in Republican politics, or in politics generally, you're sort of rewarded for two things. Can you move votes, or can you move money, or can you do both, right? The people who do both are the ones who end up in positions of power. And so Trump basically said, like, hey, I want this speaker fight to conclude. I want Kevin to win it. And he moved no votes.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is the tell that he's done, right? He may be a cultural figure, but he's not a political figure anymore. And we just need to kind of accept that he's going to be the kind of figure, maybe like a pope of conservatism, or he's going to be just this sort of like, old man yelling at the TV. Now, I think we will all, many of us will look back on this period actually thinking very...
Yeah, it's hard to look at Trump's performance over the past few months and think that he's serious about running for president. On the other hand, it's hard to discount him.
Very fondly of Trump, simply because we want to believe in an institution of the American presidency that ennobles people, even somebody as crass and as boorish as Trump, right? We want to believe, we basically, like, time heals all wounds, right? We'll remember all the funny things he said, but like not how he sold out the government to Jared Kushner, right? Like, there's a lot of things we'll just sort of like look the other way on, because it's kind of horrifying in a way to think about.
I feel a certain nostalgia for Trump, because I feel, I don't know, maybe perhaps I pull for the underdog a little bit, but it's like, whatever you want to say about this grotesque individual, he's the one who did it. Like, you guys were just kind of pitter-pattering along. He actually, like, went nuts on stage and called Mexicans rapists. He talked about the wall. He turned you into a movement. He threatened the world order with all of his nonsense. And you're kind of not appreciating the degree to which all political movements, or at least successful movements, have to have an incarnation of the movement in a single individual. He was that, and now you're pretending like it's more than him. I don't know, I have a certain, it's weird, because I was very anti-Trump for a while, for longer than I was pro-Trump, and I still am, but I have a certain appreciation for this.
I mean, there is something very American about him, right? Yeah. That we don't really want to talk about, right? That basically, the con man as president, who, like, cons himself, is like, there's nothing more American than that.
Yeah, he's Kane. He's Citizen Kane. It's the best.
Yeah, and he's also participatory and fun and exciting. And I think for a lot of people, that's enough, And it was quite nice to see somebody go up there and just blow up piety after piety of the GOP. I mean, I enjoyed that very much. But the problem is that, in the final analysis, it comes down to, like, the man in the chair, has to make decisions. And, there was a certain sense in which he was just playing.
Yeah, in the final analysis, the problem is Donald Trump is not very good at running things. That's the problem.
Being president.
Yes.
And that was fun until it was horrifying, And I think you're right. I mean, look, Gates said to me quite a while ago, he said that to be a ex-president is a far better job than to be president. And I don't think Trump actually really wants to be president. It's just a negotiating gambit that he's playing.
Yeah.
I think that's basically right. I think that is basically where we are. And I think, Trump has long been a federal informant. We talked about that in our last kind of conversation. I think he's probably still a federal informant, and the degree to which, the conservatives are sort of freaking out about classified documents in the Biden, outfit. First of all, we way overclassify everything in our society, which everyone knows. There's something like 3 million people that have have the ability to get classified documents. That's functionally, like, way too many people. And then, of course, like, the real insights in our society come from open source research, which isn't classified, right? Doing forensic accounting, which isn't classified, from facial recognition, from satellites, all of which are, like, increasingly not classified. So I just think, like, there's a certain sense in which, like, Trump is basically this kind of amazing cultural figure that made a lot of the world more exciting and interesting and kind of, like, revealing in a way. I mean, I think the Dave Chappelle sketch where he's talking about Trump as an honest liar is kind of exactly right. And Kevin is, of course, like, just a standard liar. So he's just not as appealing. I mean, his own mentor is calling him, like, a serial liar in the pages of the New Yorker, right? Like,
that's not a big deal, right? That Kevin McCarthy's mentor in Congress is calling him a liar. I mean, people fall out in politics and in life all the time. Have I ever seen Syriana? Yes. So, Syriana.
That's when you fucked up. I mean, forgive me for being crass, but, like, if the person who gave you your political start and built your...
I've fallen out with people who mentored me. If you've fallen out with a mentor, it shows that you're, among other reasons, that you're independent, that you're not slavish, that you're not just 100% predictable, and that you have other values that are higher than simply remaining in your mentor's good graces.
Built your career is publicly disparaging you in the sort of, like, erudite publication of Record. And he's, like, just telling it like it is, and then the party as a whole nominates you to be speaker. That's very telling, It's very telling of where the party is. And, one of my colleagues, for my venture investing, we were chatting about this the other day, and
Okay, so interesting conversation, pretty wild, wacky, hard to take a lot of it seriously, but still, in all the nonsense there, it sounded to me like 70% nonsense, 30% quality analysis. There from Charles Johnson talking with Richard Spencer. I'm going to end the stream here. Talk to you later.